everybody. This is Kristen V. Carter, and this is Trust Your Magic Podcast, where I talk to my friends and family who have inspired me to trust my magic because they trust theirs. And today I am here with the one and only Precious Williams. She's a theologian, she's a wife, mother, and a dear friend. How are you?
I am so good. It's so good to see you.
I know.
In person.
Likewise. How long has it been?
It's been a while. Probably even a little bit before COVID.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, we had our first chapter meeting today for my sorority in person.
Oh, wow.
In person. So our president was like, this is my first chapter meeting as president in person. Everything's been on Zoom. So it's just so good to see people.
Yeah. It's good to reach out and touch.
Yeah.
It's about time.
It is. I love it.
So, I love and respect you and appreciate our friendship. And I'm just so honored that you're here today. You have been like a big sister to me. I've lived here in LA for 12 years now. And so when I started getting settled, I was looking for a church home, looking to get a little bit more into the word. And somebody actually asked me to give you a call. And I just want to know, I'm not sure if you do. Do you remember how we met? Do you remember the first time we chatted?
I do not remember the first time we chatted, if I'm honest.
Okay.
I don't.
Okay.
Refresh my memory.
So
who
basically,
told you to call me?
So my friend Pia actually.
Oh, that's right.
So my friend Pia from New York knows Tia Madkins.
Yes.
And I was moving and I said, I need some good people. I need to know where church is, where I can get my hair done, where I can just hang out. And Tia asked me to call you. And it was funny. I gave you a call and I was scared. You answered the phone. You were really busy. And I had called because I wanted to get in your class. And you were kind of like, I can't talk right now. And I was like, she's going to talk to me.
So now that I don't remember.
Yes, I remember. For some reason,
I remember the Old Testament class.
Yes.
Okay.
And so for some reason, I remember being in the Burbank Mall parking lot trying to give you a call. And you basically were like, here's the hours of the class. I was like, okay. Well, it was a very short conversation. So when we got in the class, I said, I knew Precious was dynamic. She was trying to rush me off the phone. I knew she was dynamic.
Never. But I do remember you coming to class. Now I remember that day. I remember that day. I remember going up and greeting you. Girl, and probably just busy. Girl, was I pregnant?
No, not
I wasn't
yet.
pregnant
not yet. You weren't even married yet.
Running around. Yeah. But that was the season. That was really my season of church. Ooh, thank God that's over. But that was my season of church. So I was doing Christian education, teaching Old Testament, teaching the Psalms. I was working with the young adult ministry, co-teaching when they needed me. I was in the music ministry. I was in the choir. I was on the praise and worship team. It was just literally 5 days out of a 7-day week. I was at the church and working a full-time job.
Wow.
And dating and helping to take care of my mom. So who knows what I was doing? But I'm so happy that you heard me and that you came to the class. But I do remember you coming to my first class.
Okay, I was going to say, do you remember anything specifically? If not, no problem.
No, I don't remember. I remember greeting you and telling you that I was happy that you came. And we were just starting. It was my first lecture for that semester for Old Testament.
Okay.
Yeah, so I remember that.
Well, we're 1 for 1 because I don't remember that first day. So
yeah, I remember that day. I remember that day.
So you just mentioned that basically 5 out of 7 days of the week you were doing something church related.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to teach an Old Testament class at that time?
So when I graduated from seminary, when I was leaving Duke, I was really just praying God, where am I going? I had planned on staying on the East Coast. But my mom was having some health problems and I was like, I really need to be closer to home, but I didn't want to go home. I just could not go back to Seattle with all that rain. So I thought about Arizona and the Lord just kind of pricked my heart about LA. And when I thought about Arizona, it didn't feel right. I mean, I won't say that a voice dropped out of the sky, but it just didn't feel right. But when I started thinking about LA, it felt right. So I was like, well, I'm going to just go and I'm going to see, I'll probably stay a couple months and kind of see what happens. When I got there, I had vowed that I was never going to join another Kojic church ever again. Because as a woman with this master's in theology, um, you know, Kojic is typical Pentecostal churches as it relates to women in ministry. And that's no diss, it just kind of is. And I grew up Kojic. And so I kept thinking I'm gonna go to like a different type of church. It's either gonna be non-denominational. If it is gonna be a denomination, maybe I'll become an AME or something where I can actually utilize this passion for ministry, this like fire that's inside of me. So that first Sunday, I was driving on the 10 because I lived like in East LA, girl. I was poor. Okay, so I'm driving on the 10, and I saw the Crenshaw exit, and I got these prickles on my arm. And that's like sign number one. And then they wouldn't go away as I got closer. So I was like, well, let me get off on Crenshaw because this is the Lord. So I get off on Crenshaw. Instinctively, I make a left turn. And as I'm going, I see the cathedral and this big old sign for West Angeles Church. Now, I've heard of West Angeles growing up Kojic. So I know that this is a Kojic church. So I pull over to the side of the road. This is no lie, Kristen. And I started crying because I said, God, you are not about to send me to no Kojic church. Like, this is not about to happen. I did not go to school and study Greek and study Hebrew and get this degree to have a passion for ministry to go sit down. But as strong as that prickly feeling was, I pulled over, I go into the parking lot. I have stained makeup because I'm just like, I cannot believe I have to go to this church, right? And as soon as I get to the vestibule in the back, this older lady, she had on a hat. She looked at me, she said, "You're new today." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She grabs my arm and she said, "You're going to sit with me." And she sits me up in the front. And it just felt like home. And it didn't have some of the elements that, a lot of storefront Pentecostal holiness churches have. It didn't have, it didn't feel restricted like during that season. It didn't feel, I didn't feel like I was going to be in some sort of knot. There was like a sense of freedom. And so I came 2 more times and I joined. Now, how I got to teaching was I joined the church and I'm like, okay, well, how am I going to get involved? I am at my job at HBO, in accounting. I'm working and my phone rings and I answer it and it's Bishop.
Wow.
Okay. And he goes, "I haven't met you, but I've heard about you." And he said, "I heard that you graduated from Duke in seminary. So I want you to preach on Wednesday night service." And I was like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Are you sure?" This is a personal call. And so that is how Bishop became, like a father figure for me. So I preached my first message on a Wednesday night. And it was just a blessing. And it was interesting because I had this message. I remember I preached, "There is dew in your desert." That was the name of the message. And I preached that message. And from there, the elder who was over Christian education said, "I want you to teach a class." And, we have all these classes, but people are really, really not turned off, but curious about Old Testament because it just seems so hard to read. Would you be interested in teaching Old Testament? And at first I was like, "No, Old Testament, but I felt those prickles again. And so I said, "I'm going to teach Old Testament." When I started teaching Old Testament, they would have on average about 4 to 5 people in class. And by the time I stopped my tenure, I never had under 30 to 45 people in that class. And I had older elders. I had people age range from like 65 all the way to 18. And it was just a phenomenal time of just engaging people in a text that seemed hard and watching. There's no greater joy than watching people's faces light up when they start to connect the Old Testament and the New Testament and understand, how when Jesus is making these analogies, like, "I am the vine and you are the branches," and you realize that the menorah lamp, is shaped like a vine, and it's the light. And when you see those connections and you see people's faces starting to light up, there's no greater joy. So that's how I started teaching Old Testament. And then from there, I just got
Yeah.
involved in like all the other ministries. But it really was because Bishop called me to preach on a random Wednesday night service. And the elder who was over Christian education, he heard me that night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing because you made me excited about the Bible. I
Yay!
always wanted to learn more and really understand it. I had read the Bible through the years, but to really get into the text to do, and we had to answer questions and whatnot. And then we did a
Yeah.
sermonette at the end.
Yes.
And so to really be able to dig into the Bible, you were the first person that, one, was just relatable. Like the way that you
Okay.
put the curriculum together was really amazing. But also, too, as a person, I always appreciated your walk. Like I felt like
Yeah.
you married your walk and the word in a way that I hadn't seen before. And also, you're a great friend. So, how were you able to do that? I have always wanted to know because you know how I feel about you, but you've always been different to me because the word and your walk match. So how did that come to be in terms of just how you approach the word?
So I mean, if I'm honest, there's a certain level of authenticity that I have to bring to the
Mm-hmm.
table, right? So like even now I have on like my little crop top and I think the hardest part about people who are Christians or who claim to be preachers or teachers is that in the midst of walking in your calling,
Mm-hmm.
there's like this idea that you have to become something else
Yeah.
that is um it's an image. And the image really is a mirage. It's not real.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned early on, while I was at Howard in undergrad, I was like heavily involved in church stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was president of the gospel choir, I was a chapel assistant, I was president of chapel assistants. But then got the urge to kind of like branch off. And so when I joined AKA, the first thing I did, I was stepmaster.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And for me, it was, I love to dance, right? So I'm having Bible studies on Wednesday nights in my dorm room,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to the parties as well. And to me, there was never any sort of
Mm-hmm.
disconnect with my walk as it related to me being a human and a college aged human um, with these life experiences. And I remember people saying the same thing, like, I'm going to these Bible studies and I'm seeing you at the club, right? But I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm not drunk.
Right. Right.
I'm dancing and I'm having a great time and I'm getting up and I'm going to church the next
Mm-hmm.
day and I'm serving at my church.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people had a hard time trying to wrestle with, like, how do I be a person while also being a Christian?
Mm-hmm.
But it was never, I think sometimes the church makes it hard. But because my walk was never tethered necessarily to a church, it never was difficult. So I brought up being a stepmaster for this reason. So we're in step practice. And, we're going over these steps for this step show that's coming up. And the Lord literally, this is no lie, I hear stop and pray. So I tell everybody to stop, and I said, I know this is gonna sound really crazy because we're in step practice,
Mm-hmm.
but we need to pray. And everybody's kind of looking. So we start praying. I start praying, and they join in the prayer. A few people who are not necessarily heavy in the faith,
Mm-hmm.
they kind of go to the side. And in the midst of the prayer, when I say the Holy Spirit, you could feel the wind. And one of my line sisters like started speaking in tongues for the first time
Mm-hmm.
at step practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I, those are the type of experiences I would have on campus. I would be in secular places doing regular things, and the Lord would say, go pray for this person or go say this to this person. And it was authentic because it wasn't like walking around
Mm-hmm.
being a weirdo,
Right.
right? Like I'm like carrying my Bible everywhere and I'm like, with a bullhorn. But I think for me, coming to LA, I brought that level of authenticity. I just and I think part of the reason why I had a hard time with some church cultures is because you had people who wanted me, they didn't want me to wear red nail polish.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't necessarily like my afro.
Mm-hmm.
I would preach with bantu knots, or I would have on a pencil skirt with 5-inch heels, and but that's just me. And so I think that's what you saw. And I think that God appreciates the person that God made me. So I have no desire to be a mold of a mirage. And I think that people, when they experience that, they experience, what we say in seminary in Latin, the imago Dei, the image of God. Like we are all made in the image of God, and there's something beautiful and unique about all of us. Why would we contort to conform to some version of ourselves that looks like everybody else? Like that is not even God's desire, right? So if I had to pinpoint it, it would be that I learned early on, that the connection that's made with people as it relates to our walks with Christ, it never happens through the mirage. And there are people who get in the pulpit and they think the mirage is working, and it's not, which is why movies like Hunt for Jesus matter, because it's all a mirage, right? So it's like, who are you for real?
Yeah.
And then you allow God to begin to mold and shape, and you realize, okay, there's some things about me that I need to let go of because they're not conducive to the person God wants me to be. And then there's some things about me that are just a part of me. And the church might look at that, right, and say that that's a sin or different things like that. But nothing in scripture even says that, right? Because I used to get into it, people all the time. It's like, you at the club and you at the church. And I'm like, yeah, I'm dancing. Yeah, I'm having a good time. I'm 19 years old. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not trying to act like I'm 64. And I had a very, very good idea of that at a very early age because I saw it not work for my mother. When my mother got saved, she got saved in her living room. She had a whole experience in her living room. And she went from church to church looking for churches. And, I'm with her at these experiences, but they did it. They made her get rid of her nose ring. They made her get rid of her ankle bracelets. They made her get rid of, tried to make her get rid of her honey blonde hair. Because listen, Sonia wears her Beyonce color. This is like, she was Beyonce before. She's the original Virgo that I know. Okay. But I watched them do it. And I watched them flatten, attempt to flatten her person. And it never set well with me. And I told the Lord, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it as the person you made me. And sure, there are things that I have to give up and things that I've never been drunk. I've never, those are just things that are not good for me. But even in the midst of that, I'm still, we can play cuff it and we can dance. You know what I'm saying? Like that's that I think that's the beauty of what it means to be in the world and not of the world, and to be able to relate to all these intersections, with the world.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm curious. There's three questions that come up from what you just said. But first, before I go into more personal stuff, what is your take on Honk for Jesus?
So I loved it. You listen, the saints are angry. Okay. And I'm saying this as someone who, I grew up in church culture. I'm still very much connected to church culture. But I think at some point the mirror has to be put in the face of the mirage. And so I loved it because and I had to say this to a friend of mine. I was like, it was not a comedy, it was satire. And of course, satire is this exaggerated, blatant, kind of exaggerated expose of something that's very real. And so I loved it because I think that first of all, as a woman, watching the First Lady mime while her husband has a whole blow horn where he is
That took me
loud.
out.
That scene was everything. The scene where she dunked him in the water and I wasn't sure if she was going to pull him back out. Because there's a silencing of women in leadership that happens in a lot of churches. Where she said, he is the face and the head and I'm the neck and the spine. I just kept thinking, there's so much nuance in the midst of that, that we couldn't even tap into. So I loved it because I felt like it exposed the mirage, and we're gonna have to deal with the mirage, the prosperity gospel, and the way in which we force people to contort, to become, the way in which power is used to manipulate others into doing things. And I think the foundation of the problem that they were showing was how prosperity, right? Because he was grooming these individuals through gifts, right? And so whole idea of prosperity as it relates to items, and I loved it because it was like, yeah, this is a problem. And he was addicted. And it brought up this thought from the early 2000s. I remember going to Tavis Smiley used to have these panel discussions called State of the Black Church or something like that. And I remember there was one while I was at Howard. So now I'm aging myself, okay? But this is like early 2000s. And I remember Dr. Jeremiah Wright, who I love and admire, and Bishop Noel Jones, who I also really, really appreciate as a theologian, were on this panel. And they were asking them, what do you think is the problem right now with the church? And Noel Jones, he said something that to this day still sticks with me. He said the church has become the fate of the personality of the pastor. And that is the problem. When your prosperity is hinged upon the language of giving, and then the language of giving is conducive to the personality of a person, right? So ideally, if someone falters, you sit them down. The whole church doesn't fall apart.
Right.
Right. But their whole church was empty. 26,000 members is what the movie said. Because the church was the personality of the pastor. And so that is a problem. If we are a community, right? If some of us are the fingers, we talk about the body, the legs, the toes, we don't fall apart because, we get a new head. If this head is not capable, like, we don't scatter. And so I think that's the thing, is like, are we really a community, or are we under the spell of the personality of the pastor? And I think that is something that we really have to begin to deal with, because you had communities of people. You had the young boy in the movie saying, I used to have to go there to hoop. Now I got to find somewhere else to go. Why you got to find somewhere else to go? Why? Because that individual couldn't live a grain of salt? No. So we have to do a better job of figuring out how to sit people down and still hold our communities together. Where people are not scattered, and all these people, without a church home, and they but they were a community, and they deserved to be settled as a community.
So, as you know, and as everyone knows at home, this is all about trusting your magic. So,
Yeah.
what do you feel your magic is?
So there is a deep-seated passion for people to understand scripture and become closer to God, and to start having conversations that center God and culture. That's kind of where I've been in this season. And so that's why, doing ministry, I still have not done full-time ministry, even after all these years. I've been working in churches.
But we working on it.
I've been working in churches, and I've been, very, very diligent. And for the most part, doing this work for free. And so the way that I've paid my bills was using my undergrad degree. But I feel an urgency to now make another pivot, and to leave accounting and to move into full-time ministry. I don't exactly know what that looks like. I've had you and other people, tell me to start a separate Bible study, or just different things. But that's the magic, right? Is helping people become closer to God through a knowledge of God. And for me, that's a very, very serious. It's a very serious thing, right? Because I think the knowledge of God, right, is what makes the difference. There's a Hebrew word. The Hebrew word for knowing is an intimate knowledge. It's not like Like I could say, oh, I know Kristen lives there, but I've never been in your house. Like, oh, I heard that she makes fried chicken, but I've never tasted it. Right. So the knowledge of God isn't just, oh, I know what God did for Precious, and I know what God did for Kristen. I know what God did for the Israelites, and I know what God did for Jonah, but there's an intimate knowing, right? And I think through God's word, we come closer to like recognizing the theophanies, right? The miracles that happen. So I know with me, it's the prickles. For somebody else, they might actually hear, I've had those occasions where I've heard an audible voice, but that doesn't happen to me all the time. But there's a knowing because there's an intimacy with God, and you know how God is like moving you and shifting you so you can find direction. And you use the scriptures to get closer, right, to that voice, to get closer to, what some people would call that third eye, where you become open. So for me, that's the magic. And I want to figure out how to do that while still taking care of my family.
Well, I
yeah.
told Precious that if she ever starts anything, a church, ministry, whatever, I will be the building fund president. We will figure it out. I feel like we have meetings, or whenever we chat, it's
You
like once a
always bring
year.
it
I go
up.
like, when is this happening?
You always bring it up.
So you mentioned that you are full-time in accounting.
Yeah.
So tell me just you've already shared some thoughts in terms of trying to figure out if you're going to go full-time and whatnot, but what do you feel is going to be the leap for you going from accounting to ministry?
So yeah, accounting is not the magic. Okay, let's be clear. Accounting is not the magic. I think I've spent. I was very clear when I made the pivot to theology, and it became even more clear a couple years ago. I did a certificate program at Princeton, just so I can like meet new professors, get new material. So I did a certificate program at Princeton in ministry and theology. And it became very clear to me that I had been trusting accounting to take care of my family. My husband and I, we both work, and ministry is a passion for me. But I never took a leap of faith because I also never really felt the prickles. Now, this is why path and design matter. So I was thinking about it the other day of why haven't I felt compelled? I would say in maybe the last month, it has started to hit me. Like, so I have some hard dates now in my prayer journal, some hard dates of when I'm going to turn in my 2-week notice, and allow God to like, we going to do this journey. Right. But I was asking myself, I said, why haven't I felt compelled before this? But a series of things happened, right? So we got married. My husband and I got married. We got pregnant a month later. I had the better insurance, which was important because Essie was born early, right? Essence was born early. And so there was all these extra doctor visits and all that. She was fine. Still didn't get the prickles. Still didn't get the, right? So a couple years later, I'm pregnant with JJ. Now this is more, you know this story. So right, I spent 49 days in the hospital, 49 consecutive days in the hospital, trying to bring this baby into the world. The trauma and the drama that came with that. When I got the bills, I said, thank God for insurance. We're talking almost $400,000 worth of NICU, doctor bills, because after I had him, he was in the NICU. Then I had to rent the pump for which my insurance covered so I can, begin to produce breast milk. And all of this, that's why I had to stay.
Well,
I had to stay. Yeah, I had to stay because my journey, right, was still a part of that particular path. So ministry was something I've been doing because I love to do it. And essentially, like I said, for free. I'm teaching classes, 5 days out of 7 days out of the week. I was at the church for over 13 years for free.
Yeah.
Because I love ministry and I love people and I love helping people connect the dots. But in this season, I told the Lord, I said, now we got to come up with some creative ways to, so I don't know if I need to write a book. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
just some things that will generate income so that I can step out into this space and curate my own classes and, start doing things that's not necessarily attached to a particular place. Um, so so now I'm in the space of how do I trust the magic,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and trust the urgency of how I'm feeling it.
Yeah, it's
So
interesting because I feel like I know a lot of people who would consider themselves faithful. Like myself, I consider myself a faithful Christian, but if I'm very honest, I have not been to a church building since COVID. It's
yeah,
not even something I yearn for on Sundays.
you
I
are not alone. I have
and
these conversations with people every day who reach out to me from like back in the day, and they're just like, I'm just not compelled. Like,
mhm.
COVID created a new normal. Um, and I also think, people, the pomp and circumstance of it all, people just
It's that, but I also think that there are not enough preachers that are talking about what's
mm,
really going on and making the connection in terms of the word and what's going on in culture, to your point. And so it can feel like, wait, are we in the same
yeah,
age? Like, I remember when I talked about the last time I went to West A, and there was a young man who had been killed, another
yeah,
young man. And I went there on Sunday and we didn't talk about it at all. And it was a prosperity sermon. And I was like, I remember when church was about fighting back and activism, and where is that? I don't understand.
yeah,
So I was like, yeah, this isn't really
yeah.
for me. And then I had to search. And like I said, now I don't even search. I have gotten used to studying on my own or waiting for you to get on Clubhouse or whatever.
Well, it's interesting. Jeremiah Wright, he talked about Dr. King in a particular peculiar type of way. And he talked about the nuance of King being college educated
Mm,
and being able to make those intersections between social realities and justice and scripture,
hmm.
um, because he was seminary trained. And I think that a lot of people who are not seminary trained, and this is no diss to any preachers or teachers, but I think people who are not seminary
Right.
trained, it becomes very difficult to make those connections because when they're reading scripture, they haven't studied Hebrew culture, right? So they don't realize when Amos is talking or when
Mm,
Micah is talking or when Daniel, when they're talking, there's particular things happening in history, right? So that's why in Old Testament, I would ask you guys, what books are a part of that
right.
same era of time? And you realize Daniel, he's writing during the Babylonian exile. So you're looking at this and then you're saying, okay, well, wait a minute, what Psalms go with that? So you're reading, by the rivers of Babylon, we hung up our harps and we wept. And you realize, okay, they're in exile. This is how the people are feeling. So when you read Daniel's book, it
Hmm.
becomes a little clearer of what's happening. He was We talk about the lion's den. We
Hmm.
talk about him praying, but we don't talk about it because he was protesting.
Right.
They told him during a time of captivity that he could not honor his God in a particular type of way. He was protesting. While also being faithful in his
Hmm.
position, like close to the crown. What does that mean for us
Right.
today, right?
Right.
How do we infiltrate spaces and begin to curate places for the Holy Spirit to move, right? So we have a hard time making intersections because we don't know that there's an intersection like to embody, right? So scripture just is just fluff and words, and there's no historical context
Hmm.
that happens when you're looking um, at these particular types of texts. And so for me, I think, and this was a problem, and again, it's no diss to any particular places, but when
Hmm.
Ferguson happened, it was a huge issue for me as someone who was Kojic at the time because we were in St. Louis during convocation.
Mm.
And I had to send a series of emails to say nothing is being said. Ferguson is like a couple hours away, y'all. Like, even if it's a state, something needs to be said. Now, I've donated money. This is back when a couple of my people from Howard, they were sending buses of
Right.
students up there, and
Right.
I'm donating money to get the students up there. And I'm like, not just my church, but my denomination is near the city and nobody's saying anything. So we finally got a statement. And out of that, that's when I did my 4-week class on justice is a Christian tradition. I did that class because people are like, well, this isn't necessarily our fight. And I'm like, no, heaven is a whole other conversation. Like there's a whole thing happening on the ground. We are the boots on the ground, that need to happen. And so I just think, that's the piece, is that if we can get seminary trained people to begin to train lay people to start seeing, and of course it will be different because you guys are not studying Greek and studying Hebrew, so there's, but on the groundwork, that was my goal with Old Testament, so that you guys can look out into the world, you can see Honk for Jesus and you can see what's happening, right? You can hear Beyonce's Church Girl and you can make a particular type of connection that allows you to process and think in a certain type of way. Because to me, theology, we don't hold it hostage, right? We got to get people to start thinking at those intersections.
Right.
That's how we impact the world. And impacting culture, that's exactly what Jesus did. People aren't going to church because they're hearing a sermon and they're not able to make a connection between what's happening in the world. Because preachers are not able to make those connections. Because some preachers don't care enough to learn how to make those connections.
So as we continue, I just want to acknowledge this, no disrespect to any churches, like we've been saying, but these things have to be said. So I've always been curious to know, especially with COVID and everything, how do you prepare sermons in a time of despair when you might also be looking for hope as well?
So it goes back to when I said, I think the beauty and the rawness of preaching is being able to admit that we don't always have the answers. So when the shooting happened in Texas recently, I was meeting with my group of students for the class that I was TAing for that day, and our topic was forgiveness. And so I weaved it in, right? And what does that mean for the police officers that didn't show up, for the shooter himself who took lives? What does forgiveness mean? And we had to define forgiveness. And when we ended it, everybody on the Zoom call had tears. And I told them it's okay to not know. And I think that is probably the hardest part in trying to prepare a sermon that is open-ended. Right? But see, the complexity of the gospel is that the cross was always open-ended. Right? That's the complexity of the gospel, is that they watched him die, unsure if there was going to be a resolution. And so sometimes when you preach, you have to preach the cross unsure if you're going to get a resolution. Trusting, though, see, and this is the part where it gets finicky, that the God you serve is willing to give you one, even in your uncertainty. But people don't like to preach like that. People don't like to preach open-ended because we like to neatly wrap things up. But everything about the cross, nothing is neat, right? So when Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane, we see, what Athanasius used to call him, the God-man, right? So we see him wrestling with himself. Who am I in this moment? Am I a person? Am I God? Am I a human? Am I divinity? Right? And it's you're unsure, right? So when he gets on the cross and he quotes Psalm 22 and he says, why have you forsaken me? He's essentially saying, why have I forsaken myself? How can God say that? Right? It's finicky. And then he dies. He gives up the ghost. Luke says there's an earthquake, the veil rips, and all these things happen. And the disciples kind of go back to their lives because it was open-ended. And some of our sermons, they need to be that, because sometimes it's not our job to give the resolution. Sometimes we have to allow space for God to touch the people where they are when they leave the sanctuary. But preachers don't like to do that, right? Because it's the wonder and the revelation of God. That's when they meet him. But it goes back to my original point, is that, church has become the personality of the preacher. And you want to say, it is finished, right? despite the fact that it wasn't done.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's interesting as you're talking. I'm thinking about a few preachers that I've shared with you that I've been excited about previously. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, here goes the mirage again. And I can't follow.
And it's hard, Kristen. It's so hard. And this is why Honk for Jesus was so, I mean, it's just such a dynamic movie, is because when he did the spirit fingers and he was like, showtime, all I could do was laugh, because when you go to a play, there's always an ending. We like conclusions and we like them right away. But that's not the gospel.
Right.
That's not the gospel.
Well, we will not have a resolution or a conclusion on this part, but we are going to transition. So we have talked about quite a bit. One thing we haven't talked about yet, though, is your transition into being a wife and a mother. And I'm curious to know how that has been for you. Thus far, you have 2 beautiful children and a husband. What have you learned about yourself as a family woman now?
So it's funny. I told Rachel, she's my maid of honor, one of my closest friends, my best friend. I told her the other day, I said, I think the hardest part about all of this is I had to realize that I am a completely different person, which was hard because prior to marriage, and I said it 5 days out of the week, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. You trying to ask me when the class was, and I don't have time because I'm literally moving. Because this was also the season where I was singing, right? So I'm doing like choir work for American Idol and X Factor and all of these things that are happening. And I had a full-time job. And I don't have that energy anymore. I'm like, and at first I thought I was going crazy because I'm like, I'm tired. I can't stay up at night. And so I had to realize that my family created a softer version of myself. And I had to settle in that. And so now I have to plan smarter because I am accountable to these 2 innocent lives, and of course to my husband. So I have to plan smart. I have to be smarter about it. The other thing that I realized is I really enjoy family, which, and this is important because I am an only child raised by my mother, whose father kind of tiptoed in and out as he saw fit in those earlier stages. And so I was never the girl who bought the wedding magazines. I didn't. When JR proposed and we were trying to plan a wedding, I'm like, I don't know, what type of wedding do you want? I don't know, right? I mean, we struggle with colors, because the typical women, they know, they have the fantasy. I was like, oh, I don't know what colors do you want, Jay? Right? Because that just was not, I didn't have it. It just wasn't appealing. I watched the Cosby Show fascinated with this dynamic, right? And yes, I still have a deep-seated hatred for Bill himself for what he did. But the show was phenomenal. And I remember watching it and thinking, this is phenomenal, right? And I have friends who had other reactions that thought, that it was unreal. But no, I believed that Black families existed. And then when I got to Howard and I met people, I said, oh, you guys are those people. I didn't know, right? I didn't know that this existed. So yeah, I mean, I believed that version of the Black family existed. I just hadn't seen it like in that way for myself. But when I got to Howard, I saw it. And so I realized I love this version of me as a wife and as a mother. And but I had to also become gentle with myself because I mean, I hate to admit it, but on some levels I'm winging it too, right? Because my mother, she didn't have a successful marriage. So I didn't know what that looked like. And I'm so grateful for my husband, because I knew the attributes of the person that I wanted to be married to. So Jay and I, we're of this mindset that, money will come later, but our person is what needed to be the root and the foundation of it. And I love this version of me. JJ had Little League baseball this morning. Essie had soccer. I had chapter meeting, then to come here, and I am exhausted. But I loved every moment of it. I'm room parent. I'm on the PTA. I love it. And we were laughing earlier because I said, I used to not understand how people were stay-at-home moms. I did it, girl. It befuddled me. Do you hear me? But I get it. I still have no desire to be a stay-at-home mom. But I honor the women who do it because I get it. I get it. It is a beautiful thing to be the watering hose to the seed and to watch it blossom. It is a beautiful, beautiful thing to do. So that's what I learned. I learned a softer side of myself. And it was funny because this would take us into a whole other conversation. Because when JR was expressing to people at the church, because that's how we met, his interest in me, he told me that a few of the brothers was like, Precious is kind of, I don't know if you want to, you know what I'm saying? Because they were like, she about that business. And in a sense I was, but I didn't realize how hard I was. And so I've been processing that as well, like just thinking through what does that mean? But I had to be, because it was survival, right? Like, senior year of high school, I was homeless, and, my entire story, I had to curate a particular type of posture to ensure that I made it. And my husband, he brought out a softer side of me that if I'm honest, I didn't even know existed. And so it's been beautiful to see her. Now I got to figure out how to juxtapose her and, the entrepreneurial version of myself. Because, I don't want to just be that. But yeah, so that it's been a beautiful experience of like learning me and also meeting someone who was willing to allow me to go through that journey. Black women aren't afforded that opportunity.
Right.
Which is why I said it's a whole other conversation.
When I think about it, you and JR have had individual conversations with me and also group conversations with me about dating and just being an only child on my mom's side, and then also having my mom as well. I've seen her go through dating and whatnot. And I will never forget being on the phone with you, and you were married. You had already been married. And I literally said to you, marriage is for, like, basically,
I remember this.
Marriage is where women's dreams go to die.
I remember you saying
I
that.
actually said this to a married woman. I was like, why would I want to be married? Marriage is where dreams go to die.
Because Black women have not been afforded the opportunity to lean into all of the glory of who we are, right? And we people, these podcasters, girl, rest in peace, Kevin Samuels. But these podcasts, they talk about masculine energy, gender roles. And I say this all the time. The whole idea of gender roles, the construct of it is really, really rooted in white supremacy. Like, I mean, Black women have always worked in America, okay? There has never been a time where we have not worked. And then post-Civil War, during the Jim Crow era, we had to work as the help, as a maid, because our men couldn't get jobs, weren't allowed to get jobs. So this whole idea of like gender role, it doesn't even fit into, and so I said, finding the softer version of myself is, I want to be clear. I'm not talking about some antebellum white woman version. But I think what happens in marriages is that, especially today, when I listen to these podcasters, I hear a lot of Black men using this evangelical, specifically white evangelical gender role language, and women's dreams do die there. Oh, they die. There's enough white women in the world to tell you that they die. Okay. They do die. But I think that Black people have a very unique experience and advantage to curate a different reality.
Right.
That I don't think Black men are taking, like, are really taking advantage of when it comes to Black women.
Yeah, because there's so much going on in the world. So Black men are trying to figure out their place, they're feeling a certain way in the workplace. And I've had a number of conversations about that. Like
Yeah.
even when there's Black women in the room and there's a Black man, they have to feel like, you know what, if I come on too strong,
Yeah.
if I lead too much or whatever, then it sounds like, well, you don't appreciate the Black woman. And to a certain degree, I get that experience. But sort of shifting back to something you said about softness, like I feel soft in a lot of places, and I don't feel like I get the opportunity to really explore that. I feel like I am begging for that at this point. Guys
Yeah.
that I have liked, or even someone that I like right now, I feel like, oh man, they're not pursuing me how I would like to be pursued. Let me reach out, but then I'm reaching out more, and I'm feeling like, well, maybe they are not interested. And does JR have a brother or a cousin or something?
Girl, I mean, you know what? It's I mean, brothers have a lot of work to do. There's two roles that a lot of Black men. There is, see, the proximity to power is where you get the whole gender role, like white men. A lot of Black men want to be white men. They would never say it like that, but that's
Right.
essentially right. That's essentially what they want. So you either are going to be completely submissive to the point where you lose yourself, right? That's where the dreams die. Or Black men are going to say, Black woman, you go and I follow, right?
Which is also not what we want.
Right. So this whole idea of like journeying together, right? And it's a really important analogy, because whether you're by car or by horse, someone is in the front. Someone has to drive, right? And so essentially what I found in my marriage was that there is a unique masculine energy that my husband has that I can match, because I grew up in the hood as a Black woman. Like I said, homeless senior year. I can match that energy. Doesn't mean I'm a man, but masculine energy, I can match it. I know exactly how to match it. The beautiful thing of our dynamic is that I know when he needs me to drive, he gets up. And it's not like, it doesn't take anything from him. He's not threatened by it. He's not, but I also don't have a problem riding in the passenger seat.
But
that
did you have
doesn't
to learn to?
And I did have to learn that. But this is why I said being afforded the opportunity, right? There was a beautiful conversation that me and JR had in the midst of us dating prior to him asking me to marry him. He told me two things. He said, I've never seen you cry. We have been dating for 3 years. He said, I've never seen you cry. And I thought about it. I said, no, that's not true. He said, no, I've never seen you cry. And I was like, really? And he was like, you can cry with me. That was number one. He was essentially saying, you can trust me with your tears. I don't even know what that looks like. I didn't grow up with my dad. I didn't like fall and go to my dad and cry.
Right.
You don't cry, right? You figure it out, right? So for me, that was like, oh, okay. And then the other thing that he did was he told me, he said, you are safe with me.
Yeah.
Right? I had never, ever had anybody say that to me, because I was responsible for my own safety. Right? So that was a part of the learning experience, was me saying, I am all of who I am. It doesn't take that away, right? But you can, like, it's like a scale, right? I was unbalanced or imbalanced. I was imbalanced. And what he was saying was, you can bring this down and bring this up, right? And so what happens in a lot of marriages is that men ask women to then bring this down. But, so then your energy of like doing and being goes completely low. And then you're like mother all the time, right? Or you're like doer and never mother. But if black men would afford black women to be in equal balance of who they are, right? So that's what I'm learning, is like walking in the fullness of me in an equal, because a lot of the stuff I did prior to marriage was, bro, that was like that was survival
Yeah.
instinct.
No, it's funny. You should see the questions on these cards about this, about trusting
Oh,
a man.
yeah.
And the fact that, I grew up a latchkey child. I went to school at 5 years old by myself. I went to 10 different schools. My mom was working, PTA president. I wanted to do well in school because I didn't want to be in the way. I was a scholar, all of that.
Yeah.
And so you grow up just what you're saying. Never had my father or a man wipe my tears or anything like that. And now that I'm older, I do think that I've gotten softer through the years, but like I long for what you're saying. I'm literally like, how many of my friends are gonna watch this or listen and go, well, how did that happen? Like, how did you get there with your husband where you had that balance?
Yeah. So let me say this first. One of my biggest frustrations with black men, when I hear these conversations happen, especially, people like Kevin Samuels, rest in peace. I couldn't stand his commentary, because there was always an urging to non-black women, right? Towards black men, like, go get you somebody else because they are already domesticated, right? Like there's this idea,
Right.
because, we're latchkey, and a lot of us are coming from these survival instincts. And I hate it because in my mind, I'm thinking, we went through this emancipation journey together. We went through Jim Crow era together. We went through segregation era together. And we are literally coming on the other side of that. How dare you remove this journey of love and tell them to go get somebody else? Now, if you fall in love with someone else, who am I to say anything? But the exclusionary act of not dating black women because you don't get the instant softness, no, go on the journey with her. Tell her you've never cried with me. Tell her you can trust me. Let her find that space. It's important to me that black men know that black women have that instinct.
Yeah.
It's just a lot of times we don't get to tap into it. And so I find these.
Or, sorry to cut you off, or you tap into it and someone doesn't know what to do with it.
Then there's
And
that.
then you really go, you know what? I'm going to keep my emotions to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I think the biggest part of me and JR's relationship that is so beautiful to me is our communication. And sometimes I just flat out say, like, I have no idea what I'm doing right now, right? And he says it too, like, I have no idea what I'm doing right now. And so we figure it out. But I think that you have to trust the known and the unknown, right? So you take those psychology classes, they break you up into 4 different parts. And so it's like the known you, the unknown you, the hidden you, and I forgot what the other one is. But the known you is easy. Yeah. That's what everybody sees. Then you have the part of you that you know exists, but is not visible to everybody. That, for a lot of black women, that's the softness. That's the, and again, code switching is a language. We know how to do it, right? There's times when we have gone to PTA meetings or gone to stuff, and I let JR go up in there, and then I have to say, baby, step back. Let me get the school all the way together, right? Where you vacillate, right? The good thing about having a partner who understands who you are is that they don't feel emasculated by those moments because they know you and they trust your love. And that is where I think a lot of black men fall short, is that they don't trust the love of their partner, right? I would never intentionally hurt you. This is what my husband knows. I would never intentionally hurt you. If I have hurt you, we need to talk about it. Right? But a lot of couples don't have constant conversation where you're kind of going through the murkiness of it all, right? We react, we respond, and then we're not proactive, right? So me and JR, we do these checkups, not even like it's on the calendar. We just, what do you need from me? Especially when I see that he's changing, because this is the other part. Marriage is also about marrying somebody who is going to grow with you, right? We're changing. So I'm seeing he's changed. So he done switched jobs and he's in a new space and he has his schedule is different. So what do you need from me? This is a new season for you. What do you need from me? He does the same thing. You're ready to quit your job. What do you need from me? And we sit down, we map it out. But people aren't watching their spouse. People aren't paying attention to the clues. People aren't paying attention, to what's happening. So we don't ask those questions, right? And we're always growing. I went through a season where I love sunflowers. I don't want them anymore, right? Right? I want orchids, right? Then you go through a season, no, I want roses. How would he know that if I don't tell him?
Yeah. So when are you guys teaching a class together?
Girl, get him. That's the one. He does not like to talk in front of big people, but in big spaces or just in front of people.
But you guys, I feel like, have figured something out. And sure, as we talk about it, does not need to be a conclusion. Like, this is what y'all need to do.
Yeah.
But I think just in sharing your journey, it gives a lot of people hope and inspiration just by being who you are. I think for myself, a lot of people are inspired by what I do, or my journey or whatever. But there's a lot of other spaces I would love for people to see. Like, I'd love to share those things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I want him. I've had this conversation because what he did for me was very unique. It was very, very, very unique. He saw me, right? He saw me and he met me where I was and I saw him and I met, we laugh about this, right? Because even how we met, we're at the event and he had kept coming out. Do you need water? Girl, and I was like, I'm not trying to meet nobody right now, right? So at the end of the event, I'm looking around for my stuff because we were both volunteering at this event. I see my purse, but I don't see my bags because I had like all of this stuff because I helped set up. And I look and he's standing at the door holding all my stuff. And he goes, I'm walk you to your car. He didn't ask. Now, for the average woman, some women would have been turned off by that. But in the beginning, I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. But he noticed that I was kind of shaky. So this is what he did. We get to my car. He asked me to pop the trunk. He puts everything in my car. He opens my door and he says, you have a good night. And he leaves. All while I had been anticipating him asking me for my number. What am I going to say? Am I going to give him my number? He didn't even ask. So he one-upped me. I needed that. I did. Because I was like, wait, he didn't ask me for my number. Right? That's number one. So he had already understood my person by watching me. And we played a banter game. Now, once we get together, JR at the time that we got married, he had gone to Alabama A&M on a full ride scholarship. He dropped out, so he didn't finish. So when we're dating, we're in our mid to late 20s. And I'm like, are you going back to school? And so we're talking about life and all of that. And I was like, let me see your credit score. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, let me see your credit score. Because to me, this is about, if we're talking about a future, let's shed the layers. Let me see. Right? This is something that you're not proud of. There's pieces of you that you haven't finished. Right? And so he showed me and we talked about it. And when I left there, that was the beginning of him saying, oh, wait, if I have to reveal, I got to pull it back together. So this is his journey of going back to school, traveling to Arizona State, finishing his degree, and I was with him on that journey, but it started with me asking that question about credit. Like, what are we doing? It started with him saying, you can cry with me, right? Because there's areas of our lives that are incomplete, but the whole point of having a partner is to help you build.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think people miss that, right? In the midst of like sex and, all of the, that's the good stuff. But we don't talk about the other stuff in terms of building, right? And it's not my job to build you.
Right.
Right? It was not my job to build him. It's not his job to build me into like this soft woman. But it was his space to curate a place for her to exist.
Yeah.
It was my space to create a space for his ambition to exist.
So I have just one question for you. Would you and JR come back?
Yeah, I'll speak on his behalf.
Because you guys just really inspire me, and like I said, I've been able to have very vulnerable conversations with both of you, and even the fact that you all would be at all moved to have individual conversations with me is very moving.
Because we love
I
you.
love y'all too.
We do.
And just thinking about, and let me know if you want to answer this, but like for me, when I think about marriage, what I get most excited about, you know, in the event that I get married, is being able to watch my husband with our children, because I did not have that growing up. And so what is it like for you watching your husband with your two children?
One word, and I say it often, it has been restorative. When we had Essence, I used to watch them and cry. I would watch him roll around on the ground with her and pick flowers with her at the park, and I would just stand back and cry. Not because I didn't have it, but because she did.
Yeah.
Right? I long ago mourned the adolescence and the youth of not having a father, right? So that wasn't the issue. It was, she'll never have to say that. That meant everything to me, that she'll never have to say that. That there are memories of being loved.
Right.
When I watch him and JJ, when I watch him and our son, it's beautiful, right? Like watching him want to be like him, watching him, you know, we were in the house, this heat wave. So JR had taken off his shirt and he had his gold necklace. So JJ literally took off his shirt. He runs in his bedroom. He gets the little gold necklace that my mom had bought him for Christmas. And he goes, "We're the same." Right? I got teary-eyed because I said, you know, God willing, we will be here for them, you know, throughout their entire journeys. But there is evidence on film, on camera, stories of them being loved by their father. And for me, girl, I was like, there is divinity in all of that space. I'm very much aware of the presence of God when it comes to caring for our children. And it's just, it's been restorative. Because I think on some level, I wasn't sure if it existed.
Right.
Right? I mean, I knew that JR was going to make a great father. That was, you know, one of my greatest hopes and understandings of the type of man he is. But to actually see it, right? It's like you can look at LeBron and be like, you know, he would make a great athlete. But then to actually see him play, or to see Kobe play, or see Jordan play in person, you're like, oh, you're witnessing greatness, right? So that was the difference. It was the difference between concept, and I was like, oh, I'm witnessing. This is, yeah, it has been restorative. And it restores my faith in family, right? I hope that they really, really, as they age and they mature and whatever journeys life takes them, that they'll know that they are loved. Because there's pieces of me that had to figure out love from a man, you know. And I love my dad. You know, he passed away last year. We figured it out in my late 20s. Took us a long time to figure it out. But even with us figuring it out, there were missing pieces. I talked to my uncle, and I get these stories of things that I didn't even know, you know. And it makes me sad, you know, because I didn't get to meet him in that way. But they will. Essence and JJ will know their dad. And that is restorative to me. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah.
So,
yeah. One last question for you.
Okay.
So we've talked about a lot. So thank
We
you.
have.
So what fills your cup and what brings you joy?
Romance. I am, well, of course, theology, divinity, anything that has to do with God and ministry, helping others in that respect. After that is romance.
Okay.
I love Black romance novels. One of my ambitions is to publish a romance novel under a pseudonym.
Okay.
I am obsessed with Black love. And I think I am because it is revolutionary. All forms of love is revolutionary. But there's something beautiful about Black love because all of the odds have been against Black love. And we don't talk about it. I was reading a book by Dr. Diane Stewart. She's a professor at Emory. And she has a book about Black love. And she breaks down how when we talk about love, we often taboo love, rather.
Right.
We often talk about LGBTQ or, those types of loves that are taboo. But no one brings up the fact that Black love in the history of America had been taboo. And a lot of us are operating through the lens of that history. And we don't even realize it. We don't understand when we have these gender wars. We're having them on the backs of a history that has denied Black people from being together. Right. So the problem that exists within Black love and the dynamic of Black love that we don't talk about in these podcasts, and I watch these men and we joke about it, but the history has not allotted Black men and Black women to fully engage and to be together. We were denied marriage. We were, people were sold off, and families have been broken apart, and all of this. And so when I read books where I see that they win, girl, listen. And my favorite author is Beverly Jenkins. She is a Black historical romance, and she primarily writes during the Reconstruction era. So this is like the season where Black people are trying to figure it out. And for a while, for about 7 years, we were doing it. We were thriving. And then you start to see the cracks and the fizzers. And so she writes during that time. And it's, girl, to see them going through these journeys of like running and hiding and all for the sake of love, girl. So that is, when I have free time, that's what I'm doing. I am reading Black romance authors, Nia Forrester, Christina C. Jones, Love Belvin, of course Beverly Jenkins. I just it is beautiful and hopeful, and I hope to one day be at least publish one.
Yes.
But yeah.
I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
So where can everybody find you?
So I am, of course, on Facebook under Precious Williams. On Instagram, where I try my best to do daily inspirationals. It doesn't happen all the time because my schedule's crazy, but it's at Diva Precious, Um, and I am trying to figure out how to do a YouTube channel. So,
Okay.
we'll see. But for the most part, I post most of my stuff on Instagram. So yeah, at Diva Precious is where you can find me.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
it has been such a pleasure and a blessing to have you here.
As always, Kristen.
Thank you.
I love you.
I love you too. So thank you all for tuning in, for listening and watching to Trust Your Magic podcast. This is Kristen V. Carter. So if you want to continue to hear us, see us, whatever, you can like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.
See you next time.